In the 18th century, the country estate of Prince Nikita Yurievich Trubetskoy lay on the high bank of the Moscow River in a place called Neskuchnoe, not far from the Sparrow Hills. The estate was built in the early 1750s. It was designed by Dmitry Vasilievich Utomsky, an eminent Moscow architect of the Baroque period. Today, nothing remains of Prince Trubetskoy's properties. They have been replaced by modern tower blocks and the land is traversed by a busy highway. However, the appearance of this vanished estate was recorded in a unique album compiled by the architect and one of his assistants as a gift to Prince Trubetskoy, a token of gratitude for his patronage. The territory occupied by the estate was not particularly large. The layout was based on a series of longitudinal and transverse avenues set at right angles. A regular garden with copses and mazes was laid out, beginning from the Kaluga Road, present-day Leninsky Prospect. The main longitudinal avenue ran across the garden from the entrance gates to the prince's mansion and continued behind the house in a parterre, looking towards the Novodevichy convent, which was clearly visible from this bank of the Moscow River. Lateral avenues were not extended beyond the garden boundaries. They led to summer houses with painted tableaux on the walls that lent an illusory perspective, extending the paths into non-existent space. A two-story mansion with ancillary wings formed the primary group of the buildings in the estate ensemble. Two wings were connected to the house by a curved balustrade, creating a front courtyard. Residential buildings were separated from the park by a low wall, with gates in the form of a triumphal arch. A short distance away, closer to the forest, stood an isolated part of the estate with a house for guests, an aviary, the Hermitage Pavilion, and a summer house on a hillock, or rather, as described in the drawings, on an island. Behind the manor house, on the side neighbouring the Moscow River, was a parterre garden surrounded by a long gallery and orangery. All the estate buildings, except the aviary and orangery, were wooden. The main house was a slightly elongated rectangle with multiple windows. The building's wooden construction allowed for narrow piers that provided good lighting for the interiors. Windows were set in variously shaped frames with carved decoration. Each of the house's four facades had its own specific design. The facade with the main entrance was graced by a magnificent six-columned portico that supported the first-floor balcony. On the upper level, the central avant-cour was topped by a triangular fronton with sculptural figures and the prince's heraldic crown. The building was capped by a parapet and an elegant balustrade, arrayed with decorative vases. The facade facing the Moscow River was conceived on a smaller scale. There was no portico, and the balcony rested on elegant cantilevers. The configuration of the figured fronton was less constrained, the sculptural embellishment more modest. The lateral facades of the house also differed from one another by the design of the central avant-cour and window frames, and by the shape of frontons above them. The wings of the main house were much smaller, with more unassuming decoration. A servant's house and guardhouse were situated either side of the entrance gates, with a kitchen and valets' houses in the corners of the front courtyard. From the main courtyard, visitors could proceed through side gates decorated with sculpture to the aviary. The unusual silhouette of this structure, designed as a triangle, immediately drew attention. Above the central section towered a massive stepped pyramid, extending the internal space to accommodate an open-air enclosure. Beside the aviary was a long wall, or possibly a covered walkway, framed by a vaulted semicircular trellis entwined with plants. The path led to the Hermitage Pavilion, denoted in the drawings as a house of seclusion, in a literal translation from the French. This small pavilion was practically devoid of architectural decoration. The hermitage was surrounded on all sides by a hedge that concealed the pavilion from the eyes of passers-by and prevented anyone from approaching the walls. On a hillock closer to the river stood a graceful octagonal summer-house with a high cupola. The walls were painted with garlands and images of bulls' heads, while the dome was crowned by a decorative vase of plants. Let us return to the main house and examine the part of the estate near the Moscow River. At the edge of the parterre garden stood a gallery constructed from an elongated colonnade with small pavilions at each end. From there the viewer had a broad vista of the Moscow River and Novodevichy Convent. The gallery served as a place for relaxation and amusement en plein air. An integral element in any prosperous estate of that period was the orangery. Here the gardeners cultivated fruits that were still exotic in Russia: oranges, Seville oranges, and pineapples. Prince Trubetskoy's estate was no exception. A large stone orangery stood in alignment with the gallery as the final perspective from the parterre garden. In the central section was a semicircular protuberance, a curved fronton adorned by added columns. Rich decoration gave the orangery the appearance of a palace pavilion. Separate from all the estate buildings and next to the park was a house for guests. This one-story structure is not notable for its splendour. The only factor distinguishing it from the ancillary wings is the broad front courtyard. Like the courtyard of the prince's mansion, it was surrounded by a curved balustrade with two decorative vases and pyramids. Two miniature houses or guardhouses were also included in the composition of the enclosure. Prince Trubetskoy's estate rightly occupied a place among the most beautiful and magnificent estates of the 18th century. On presenting the album of drawings to the prince, the architect Dmitry Vasilievich Utomsky aptly called it the finest fruit of my science.